Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of WIG Talks, the Brilliant or Bust podcast. Today's show is sponsored by Object Matrix, Vidispine, and Zixi. Today, the WIG Talks crew is discussing how 5G technology is affecting the media industry. Here is Jonathan Morgan of Object Matrix, Ben Davenport from Vidispine, Eric Bolten of Zixi, Steve Sharman with the Workflow Innovation Group, and me, your host, Christy King. Let's get to it. What does this mean to people in the media industry? What does 5G do for us? Steve, what do you think about that?
It's almost the final missing piece of the puzzle, because so much of what we are, or where we're trying to go, requires ubiquitous connectivity, ubiquitous, very high bandwidth, potentially low latency connectivity as well. I mean, I've just had fiber put into the house back in January.
First I'm time so I got jealous.
I know, it's brilliant, but this is a thing. The fact that you can both upload and download at really high capacity just makes the whole idea of working from home, distributed workflows, it makes it feel possible. Whereas, for years and years, we've kind of done this thing where people go, oh yeah, well you'll capture on your P2 card and then upload the rushes from in your hotel room, which we all know is a load of old tosh, because we've never had you can't even do your email from a hotel room, never mind about upload rushes. If you got 5G, you can. I remember going to DPP meetings before it became the sort of the world beating behemoth that it now is. And all these folks were off in the corner sort of banging on about connectivity. And I was sitting there thinking, this is really dull. But actually, I'm kind of starting to admit to myself that they were right. It is a really important part of the picture.
And it's not just today, and yay, it's neat, everybody has faster speeds. Although, as Steve just said, that has value, a lot of value to those of us. But I think all of us are going to be affected by this in a fairly deep way. Is that not true, Eric?
Definitely, it's a thing. 5G is an entirely new addition. As Steve points out, so you definitely get more bandwidth. You have this promise of unbelievably low latency. Zixi did a survey on what kinds of B2B uses there would be in November of last year, across a couple of hundred executives with streaming media. And about 13% said it would be a contribution case, which we sort of expected. Another 14 on sort of business to business transmission. A surprising 24% said they would be in distribution. And then of course there's the direct to consumer, because once you're on a radio network, it's a pretty short hop. And the in-venue stuff and the experiential immersive things are going to be big. We started doing some early POCs with a big client, and that turned into a production pilot that's going to go to 500 cable head ends in this quarter. So we've been running and really doing and working deeply with our partners on this project of Verizon and Amazon. But I think that idea of how a content company, a cloud company, a carrier, the cellular network, and the consumer are all going to come together. So it's a very large addition of network capacity, but it's going to be disruptive in satellite. It's going to be accretive to IP terrestrial, and it's going to impact CDN. So it's going to have a lot of different impacts across the spectrum of business models. And then you jump over to the production side with untethered production and studio everywhere constructs that we were talking about.
One of the things that was sort of interesting to me when I was doing a little bit of research about what 5G could mean to the B2B side of the media industry is, as always, when there's a change coming to an industry, there's always this huge projection of growth, right? Because then all the investors get all excited and everybody gets all excited about these new revenue opportunities. But I think it's obvious that something else is getting displaced. But what are some of the things that could potentially shrink, or what are the parts of the industry that maybe will slow down or become irrelevant?
The nature of 5G, it's running on C-band. So certainly the satellite C-band distribution services will be impacted, but I think satellite as like a contribution uplink has been under pressure for a long time, and only now is available at the top tier stuff, and everybody's pretty comfortable with IP contribution. 5G is just going to mean you have huge access to 1 gig, 2 gig kind of things, and you're going to be able to do 4K in a way you couldn't, and 8K in a way you couldn't. But I think that the difference will be you'll have some cannibalization of legacy methods, but you're going to be adding in new capabilities. Like going to a venue is going to become, why do people go to see a football game? And why will people go to a baseball game? Because there'll be an infrastructure there that won't be at your house, because you'll be able to actually see AR and VR and connect and take tailgating to some other level that you couldn't imagine. And of course, within that, with all the content, will be a plethora of advertising opportunities and ways for people to monetize that. If you're sitting in a car, in a taxi, or in an Uber, you're going to have access to signals that, you're not getting Wi-Fi in your cab, but you will be getting 5G, and you will be getting targeted low latency ads. And if you need to, maybe you'll be gambling on your way to the office, but you're going to have a lot of opportunity to spend some money.
Oh dear.
I would add to that. Not only is it going to add capability and capacity and reach that we haven't previously had, but we're also going to see it, to answer your question, replace some things. So where we may have previously used Wi-Fi, it may be that actually 5G gives you much more there. So not only does it give you much more, it can connect more devices, it has better network splitting, it has low latency. Latency can go down to a millisecond in some cases. You can see on private networks built on 5G, you get speeds up to 10 gig of throughput. So actually 10 gigabyte of throughput even. So where in the past you were perhaps limited by something like a Wi-Fi technology, it gives you much more, to the point where you may not even want to have your Wi-Fi anymore. You may just have a private 5G network being put into areas where previously other technologies would have been used.
Mm-hmm.
It actually feels like a sort of genuine additive technology, doesn't it? We've got technology which is actually filling in a gap, as opposed to one which is necessarily displacing things, because there's, as Eric says, those things which are kind of being displaced, like maybe satellite uplink, were kind of being displaced anyway for cost and flexibility. We don't often see technologies which are kind of genuinely additive. In the broadcast sector, we often see this kind of messy thing where things are sliding in, and we've got a big issue to work out how on earth we kind of let them coexist for ages and then eventually phase out the old stuff. Whereas this actually feels like a new enabler. People have been talking about this as being a thing for ages. I go, yeah, really? It's just mobile, isn't it? And then when you actually once you experience genuine kind of high bandwidth connectivity, you're thinking, no, actually it's not just another mobile. Actually, it's there are far wider implications at kind of all parts of the content chain. Maybe
one of the things that I read a lot about was the potential for new advertising revenue, which I imagine is of paramount importance to anyone in the media industry. Increased revenue is always good for everybody, but the exponential change in bandwidth availability also, as Steve, you talked about earlier, it's not just that you can upload things faster, is that it's the exchange of information is faster. So that means a lot more data about the people you're serving. So to that end, that to me says, okay, then that means we're generating a heck of a lot more content. So media providers aren't just making longer shows or bigger shows or different versions of shows, but there's actually a way to embed a whole lot of content into the content, advertising, sponsorship into the content, which means you're actually creating shows that can be personalized to those who are watching, maybe even down to the individual. All of that, to your point, takes a huge amount of bandwidth to pull that off, and also an awful lot of sophistication on the side of media providers. That seems like it would affect all of you and all of your businesses. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love some of the capacity. I mean, Eric just spoke about 10 different ways, probably more, that this technology can be used. And one of them that he touched on very quickly was in stadia. Now, if I'm in a stadium and I'm a normal spectator, but I have this device in my hand and it's a phone, And suddenly it can be connected to my 5G private network in the stadium. I can be looking up content. I can be replaying action. I can be getting views from the other side of the stadium in real time. I could be looking up stats and everything else. And that's an amazing opportunity for people to advertise to me. So it not only opens up, if you like, new ways of doing old things, but actually a whole new way to be advertised to within all of that.
It's the opportunity to enrich the experience, isn't it, as well? It's the additional engagement. You've got all those opportunities to kind of put more advertising in front of people, but you've also got that whole thing about watching the TV and while simultaneously maybe watching another match or different views from a match, the same match on the mobile, and consuming the stats. And it's all about kind of engaging those people more. We all say that we're all really, we're keen to get back into sports and back into stadiums, but are we really? Because it's actually quite nice to be at home with a beer. And is the experience, the additive experience as well as the advertising, part of something which is going to kind of pull us in?
What do you think, Ben?
I think that's a cracking point. I mean, sort of going away from the monetization topic here, but how much is what's happened in the last 18 months going to start impacting the roadmap for 5G, in that we're not as mobile as we were 18 months ago. It's less of a challenge, and yeah, there's definitely some interesting opportunities that might attract us back to venues, and I think that's pretty exciting. But is that what we were geared up for? And maybe back to you, Eric. I mean, how much have you seen the roadmap for 5G sort of disrupted in the last 18 months as we've not been moving around so much?
Well, I could say that the immediate disruption was trying to get people into physical innovation labs and testing as we were rolling this out. So we had to get people on site to do things, and that was a little more challenging. But I think from the roadmap and even talking, we were pretty much ready to ink a very large deal with a certain set of cinema chains to roll out live contribution to the cinemas. So people need to see movies, but it's about how do you keep capacity while you have an external Black Swan event in a pandemic. You have a larger demographic issue if you're a professional sports team, in that a lot of the younger generation, millennials and Gen Z, not particularly excited about going to the venue the way that we were all raised. And that's a huge amount of revenue to all these different teams. And I think seeing certain CEOs, I saw a CEO of IMAX was predicting just a complete rush. Like the pent up demand is fairly high. So what the new normal becomes and how this all settles out remains to be seen. Ironically, people really want to go on cruise lines. I wouldn't be my first choice, but this is what they want to do. And I think they're going to want to really like shared experiences, people get out. But back to what I was saying, that the plans that I can see is that the infrastructures, like you said, what's going to make you go to a sporting event or a concert and be able to connect as a fan and as an experience. And, this works its way right into an NFT. Like you go to this event and next thing you know, you're recording your entire day out with your family. And these are really big money experiences. You go to a baseball game in Boston for the Red Sox, and that's a $400 event for a family of four, maybe $500. So it's not small, but how do you make that experience super memorable? And then how do you make it relevant to kids that don't really even watch live sports? They want to know, how does it tie off to my fantasy league, or how does it tie off to whatever sports that I play on my video game? So the cross-pollination of this is going to be interesting, and it goes back to the money. If you have the infrastructure, you can do really interesting things, and we're about to have that infrastructure.
That's kind of where I keep thinking about it is, again, coming from the content creation side, where I spent most of my career, it's every time there's a leap forward in technology, there's sort of like half fear, oh God, everything's going to change, and half excitement, oh God, everything's going to change. And this feels like another one of those moments. Steve, to your point, it does feel like a big deal. It doesn't feel like like having a ton of bandwidth feels like a big deal. And I think it's because we've had just enough to be able to do some things, but then be able, wouldn't it be cool if, right? Like, how many times have we stood around at conferences or whatever and said, wouldn't it be cool if we could just, right? And so I feel like the 5G thing gives content creators now really interesting combination of data, business intelligence, data analytics, some real cool, interesting exchange down to the individual user, possibly, especially in the mobile world, because they've logged in and you know them, right? Especially inside of an app at a football game or whatever. Then you have this other side, which is, if it's a Gen Z, you can't just feed him a commercial. And as I've talked about with some of you in other podcasts, a Gen Z person doesn't want to see a commercial or any kind of advertisement that isn't accurate to their interests, right? They're annoyed if it's not their thought process or their interest. So that means it's incumbent upon content creators to have maybe pre-produced and stored and ready to be inserted a variety of different ways to message someone in the moment when it's relevant. So if you think about all the behind the scenes stuff that has to be in place in order for that to work, you have data integration, you have content delivery mechanisms, you've got to have trigger mechanisms to serve an ad or serve a sponsored thing or start up a game. And then the thing that I was laughing about is there's this hilarious piece of information I ran across today that said there's a real potential for the introduction of haptics where you pay by the sensory input. And of course, I had all sorts of immediately inappropriate thoughts about this. I'm thinking, clearly the porn industry is the one that started down this path, because that's where a whole bunch of interesting ideas come from. But it was really interesting to me to start thinking about how many things you could divide up in pieces. Like, whether it's the edge computing, where they were saying 1% of users will pay the premium to get the top, data bandwidth in and out. Well, that's probably true for providers as well. Does that become a perk? And if you've got a haptic suit on and you only want to pay for sight but not touch, I started really thinking about how much nickel and diming could kind of go on to this world, both at the consumer side and businesses, that we'd have to kind of be careful maybe not to nickel and dime the development of all this process as well. So
yeah. I mean, we're always. I suppose the WIG podcast is exploring the innovation to the overall media industry brought by porn over the ages. Because we all know that's actually been the case, although we don't really admit it. The mass distribution and so on. But I think you're touching, excuse that, on something which is actually really interesting, because that kind of that high bandwidth and low latency actually it brings that complex interaction really close to you. Because if you think about things like the personalized experience, we know that, for example, the real-time photorealistic rendering with game engines is now a big thing for content creators. And when you've got to kind of do something in the moment, send it somewhere to be processed for a long time and then brought back, that isn't compatible with a real-time experience. When you've got a low latency link to almost kind of be in that world and generate things which are kind of relevant to you here and now, whether it's kind of visual or haptic or whatever, and brought back with an advert in it, because with 5G, you're there in the kind of the cloud or on the on-prem, whatever it is, you're next to the game engine. That, as a content creator, that surely gives you a whole bunch of opportunity to think about things that might be possible. I think one of the sort of big things here is to get people to kind of challenge themselves around, how do we get a step change out of this? How do you not just kind of do a bit more of what we currently do? And how do you kind of use this opportunity to really drive some innovation, both in advertising and monetization, but also in kind of the nature of what a rich experience is?
Being a bit of a negative Nancy, though, just for a minute, I think if anything we've learned over the last 5 years is that content itself is the key thing, and the quality doesn't actually matter that much anymore. I mean, yes, sure, things that are visually or generally more immersive and more pleasant in some ways, but actually that's not going to grab us and make us engage with that content. It's the person or the ideas around that content. And I mean, you can go down some weird rabbit holes on like YouTube and other video platforms these days, you know, with different kinds of content, and you know, it's content, you know, not curated for you in the same way these days. And I do wonder, you're right, how do we avoid it just being another step in one direction versus being something that we can really get the most from?
I think it has some interesting other attributes. I saw a couple of things. I was on a panel with our good friends at BT Sport, and they were definitely projecting a very interesting future, quite literally. So holographic displays, and how like there was, you know, one guy in the stadium and his buddies are back at home and they can see the sport visualized. So you're going to get your R2-D2 Princess Leia of the future stuff happening. But and then on the other side of the coin, you know, what does gaming mean and what does gambling mean when you're low latency and you can be in a venue or you go to a sports book and have, you know, ubiquitous access to all of this stuff. I think that the rollout, the amount of money that's being put into this is quite enormous. You know, I mean, I know it's public records that you've got Verizon spent almost 20 billion beefing up its fiber backbone to support only 5G, and spent another 50 billion plus on buying spectrum, and AT&T and the like will be doing all similar. China has completely cleared out the C spectrum to make 5G a fundamental strategic asset. And it's going to have, you know, while it hits media and entertainment, it just has a much broader impact on manufacturing and industrial AR, VR, and, you know, just a crazy amount of larger applications. Things like we talked about, the autonomous vehicles, and how does that play out into a day-to-day life? Like, if you've got a consumer cycle now where people don't really do what I did when I was growing up, where you move out of your house at 18 and buy a television set, get some milk crates and some lawn furniture and call it your first apartment. People are now, don't buy the car. They don't buy the TV set. They don't subscribe to traditional monetized broadcast services. And as Christy loves to beat the data drum, it is going to finally really be there. And you're going to have, like, we had a television industry based on this random thing called the Nielsen ratings, which we never even knew if someone was in the living room and watching it. And now you're going to have real-time geospatial data and understand how crowds move and people consume, and take this thing down to very specific. So in the US, I've been hearing a lot more rumblings on the mythical ATSC 3.0, which we've all been kind of waiting for. And it was all, is it marketing hype? Is it this? Well, 5G actually provides the hub and spoke for that in a way you never did. And all of a sudden, in the mid-America in Iowa and Nebraska, you're going to be able to get 25 megabit signals to someone's home when they've never seen that. And all you need is a simple little data path back, and I'll be able to completely tune that programming and completely tune that app. And this stuff's, it's not like the move of our ancient SD to HD and took 15 years and our complete misstep into ill-founded 3D ideas that made everybody sick. This is going to be like a big ubiquitous, I can put programming out there. I mean, I'm watching the National Hockey League already do its cloud virtualization, but adding in big 4K screens that will suddenly become 8K. And you're going to be able to just put out a plethora of programs that can be packaged and repackaged in ways that just would have been cost prohibitive or just basically infrastructurally impossible. And right now, if you're public companies and making this, everybody is chasing this very hard, because you've got an entire consumer migration that's kind of somewhat disinterested unless you make it really compelling. And I agree with you, Ben, that the storylines, and you have to have it, but look what the movie industry became. Martin Scorsese not happy with their like one big roller coaster ride. Well, I'm pretty sure broadcast television's heading in that same direction.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about, okay, what does that mean that the media vendor industry should be thinking about right now? One of the statistics I saw was that you will have a true challenge to at-home bandwidth by 2028. Wireless, the bandwidth availability is going to be there to truly challenge at-home internet connectivity by 2028. what is it that the industry should be doing or thinking about or planning or buying? And I mean everything: storage, delivery, ad insertion, metadata. What are all these vendors? What should they be thinking about and doing? How real is this stuff?
First of all, not where I live, I suspect, given that we've barely got 4G. But this isn't just about media and entertainment. This affects all industry, and therefore there's going to have to be a slight cultural change, or there will be a cultural change as a result. And we've already seen this shift to work anywhere kind of methodologies, where I can work anywhere more or less, but we're going to have to put that in for media organizations as well, and they're going to have to facilitate that. I think that's really important, not least because one of the things that comes from that kind of global work anywhere thing is access to the talent, which goes back to the comment I made before, access to the content. And I think that's really important for media organizations, making sure you have an infrastructure, whatever that is, that enables your workforce, your talent, to be wherever they need to be to create that content. And that's not as obvious as it might seem. Remote working, so you can have a 5G card and you can finally take that footage off your camera and upload it really quickly. Great, but actually there's way more to it than that. Enabling access to content from wherever they are, so they can search and catalog or whatever else. And I think that's going to be a big shift that we've already started to see in the last year, but I think will continue.
Because from one perspective, when you're as old as me, 2028 is tomorrow. But in terms of cycle, 2028 is an age away. So it will be interesting to see how it grows. It's taken a long time, for example, for the content companies to get comfortable with the idea that for example, their content is in the public cloud, and it's safe there, and we can all get together and work on it. I think in order to kind of make the most of ubiquitous connectivity, we've really got to start thinking about what does things like security mean, because you sure as heck don't want to be in a position where I need to kind of log onto my VPN client and do X, Y, and Z before I can start to work with that content. We've got to think about almost zero touch security. There will be a lot of folks out there thinking about, so how do we make the most of the experiences that we can build? There'll be those early adopters able to build stuff in places we know there's going to be 5G, and I think there's then the parallel track, or there should be a parallel track of how do we get all the boring but important stuff in place. We've often, it seems, stepped ahead on our ability to deliver interesting stuff to consumers, but our back office remains kind of 20 years old. And I think the two things have got to accelerate and grow in the same speed, same proportion.
One of the things that I heard mentioned earlier was broadcasters, and haven't heard since, because it's not broadcasters, right? It's media organizations, it's media facilities, it's anybody producing media, anybody who wants to use media to enhance a experience. So when you talk about how do people get ready for this is everywhere. This is museums, this is stadiums, this is anywhere where media can enhance an experience is going to be relevant for getting ready for how do we use this technology going forwards. Maybe as an aside, maybe NAB should be changed to NAMO or something, because it's not broadcast anymore, right? It's about everywhere and everything. Yes, it's about making old things more relevant to Gen Z or Gen Z. But it's also the other way. It's about making things ready and better for that generation, for themselves as well. So if you go to an esports event, am I going to look at my phone and be able to see in-action play from the person I want to be watching? Or am I just stuck on the screen that's in front of me? So how do we prepare for that? What do we put into place to make that happen? It is the hardware, it's the software, it's the content producers, the content editors, it's the whole spectrum. And actually, it just makes our industry more exciting, touching more areas and expanding out what actually media can mean to people's lives in a day-to-day way.
It's projected that 5G means there's sub 10 millisecond, if not a single millisecond in latency. What things does that sub 1 millisecond latency mean for the media industry next year, as opposed to my mythical 15 years from now?
Look, we talk about this, the milliseconds of latency are going to be very, very low. There's no question about that. Single digit will be fairly confined to certain specific conditions. You're not getting, I mean, we've been running it in real life, and as advertised, you'll see sub 100. But considering you're dealing in seconds and things right now, when you get below 30 milliseconds, the network's going faster than our human brains are actually processing what I'm saying right now. Then that means that things literally could, quote, read your mind, because the predictive analytics will be ahead of you on front of that. So that's something to be thought about. But the coordination and the management of that, I mean, I go back to things like gambling as a straight up place to look at. In the American sports realm, NFL expects that it'll get about $2 billion of a bump, baseball about 1.5 billion, and NBA and NHL an additional billion-ish. So that's an awful lot of revenue to an industry that's not, I wouldn't say maxed out, but it's interesting as how pricing and pieces keep going up.
And where are they getting the extra revenue from? From gambling? What?
Gambling.
Where? Oh, it's from gambling. Okay, so if the latency is that small, then gambling becomes real in venue at the. Well,
it becomes in venue and it becomes in Vegas, but mostly it becomes in game. Like you could literally sit there and bet on the next pitch, and you can bet on which player will. I'm third and down in an American football game, and I can say throw or run, and then I'm going to do it either way, and I can call which player, and then it ties to fantasy. I mean, you just get into some very exotic ways that you could put together, the monetization of this. That said, this brings me back, and I am a raving optimist and push all this stuff out. But having lived through the .com world and remembering when we were debating, lean forward versus lean back television, and the PC was never going to take over. Well, that debate kind of got settled. But there is a limit as to how much you can saddle a consumer with any experience, no matter how good it is. People don't have unlimited wallets. I mean, you're only trying to, the cable bill kind of still in the US has to sit no higher than $300 a month for people who are like, I'm not, even now, you're losing that with the cord cut and the cord never, and the now always untethered kind of world. Like one of the things that's always driven the broadcast world crazy was I'm looking at one television and I can see the game here and I see the next television, and then that thing doesn't go off in a synchronized way. 5G will give you ways to synchronize things so that people are having common experiences even when they're dispersed, and you're going to be able to synchronize signals in a much better way. That helps for certain things so that I don't hear the goal was scored in my neighbor's apartment before I know what I saw on my screen. All public space is about to become a broadcast arena, and where's it you can touch with people and do that across crowds because of the latency issue. That gets interesting, and we're going to see what people consider entertainment. Like if I tried to explain to this group 10 years ago what esports was, and that you're going to say, no, this is a broadcast of people playing video games. It's not actually playing video games. It was a little confusing. And meanwhile, everybody's all in on the size of that industry and what that means. And tying like the ways that games themselves are completely connected at almost zero latency themselves. And then you add in now the radio network to support that. You're going to see, well, we, the industry, try to react to that, watching how the generation that has that tool set shapes its own outcomes. I'm not quite sure we fully appreciate that. Like you'll be able to take social media has mostly been a file-based experience, right? You upload to TikTok and Instagram.
Yep.
With 5G, you're going to be able to take one single live feed in an experience and then make that experience available to tens of devices, hundreds, thousands. It's going to kind of play itself out, a mixture of that to other parts. I touched on it briefly, but this NFT and idea that I can create a digital experience and then make it an original and monetize it, we're going to see how that plays out. But I keep my eye on that space, because you will be able to capture, curate, and sign, a digital experience that you had, and your friends are watching you down the Grand Canyon in Canton, although Grand Canyon will never have the 5G, but something.
I think there's a big thing around. Have you guys seen that the term metaverse is back with us? After sort of 10 years ago, a lot of nonsense about people opening embassies in Second Life, right? And what happened to that? It all kind of kind of went away again, didn't it? The things that Eric's just been talking about are so powerful, because they finally make things possible in a relatively simple and easy to do way. Because not only is the bandwidth and the network evolved, but all the other pieces are they were waiting for the network to catch up.
And we know how to do UI now, both at the consumer level, but also our side, the media industry, like the tools for doing metadata, the tools for moving media around, the tools for setting up a workflow. Like mere mortals like me can look at it and go, okay, this is how I need all these systems to tie together and how I need them to work. 15 years ago, I couldn't do it without a massive amount of IT and broadcast engineer beatings to make those two groups of people talk to each other. But, now you really can. That, I think usability is a huge point of this. You're right. It's not just that the internet is now so much faster with 5G. It's that we have had all this practice time to figure out how to build these systems and make it all work. It feels that way.
Yeah, we've. I mean, let's face it. We've failed loads of times on loads of things. But sooner or later, every time you fail at something, you learn something from it. Ultimately, you kind of get to the point where you think, yeah, that thing that was crap 10 years ago. Now there's a real opportunity that we can do what we want to do, and it's good, and it's not hugely expensive, and people will buy these devices to have in there. You've got this device in your hand to make it happen. You don't have to go and get people to buy a separate thing, all that kind of stuff.
What is it about the coming of 5G that is most interesting to you, either to your business or to you personally?
The least kind of out there kind of thing, and the most going to happen quickly thing, is that in Stadia experience, in Stadia enhancements of what you're doing. And that for me is the one that started to open my eyes to the fact it's not just about more bandwidth. It's actually about the ease of connectivity, the personalized experience, the ability to get real-time stats, which can go into gambling, as Eric talked about earlier. But that whole thing of the in-Stadia experience is one of my favorite things about 5G.
I'll jump on that to follow the thread and say I think that is going to be super interesting, and because it's both going to be impactful. It's going to change the way we humans interact with things that we like to do to entertain ourselves, but it's very actionable. So it's not like we have to wait for the Star Trek holodeck to come in and finish this all off. And what I'm kind of interested in, because we were really close while we're doing the distribution, is that the in-stadium experience can now be connected very broadly to other areas it might not. So if I can go see an in-stadium experience, but watch it in a theater without having to get there, or see different things, or maybe that revives Broadway and changes the way I can see a show, or I can see my favorite TV show, Saturday Night Live, from a different perspective behind the scenes, I would pay $100 to go to the theater and watch that happen while someone served me a nice meal and a fine cocktail. And I think that is the upside of the pandemic, is they now deliver cocktails. So the whole part here is that I think that, human experiences are going to be extended in fun ways and very tangible ways, that we don't have to wait for, this, even though I completely agree with Steve that 2028 is tomorrow. I would like, I'm looking forward to 2022 and seeing what this stuff all does as it rolls out.
I'm going to jump on that and say the most exciting thing is going to be instant gratification, isn't it? Because that's what it is. The extra bandwidth, the low latency. you'll be able to send a request and get a response really quickly. And maybe even I'm looking forward to the next pandemic, because there probably will be one. But I mean, the creativity that people have come up with in the last year has been quite incredible. And you know, talking about the experiences that we can expect with 5G, something that jumps into my mind again from what Eric was saying about going to the theatre. I don't know if you heard about this telephone opera stuff. It was something that Mark Shrubin was talking about as part of the HPA conference and things. And I mean, it just sounds amazing, these different sort of immersive experiences that people have come up with. And I think the opportunities there with 5G are brilliant. I'm not a big sports guy. I'm not going to go to a stadium, but other things that kind of have that connectivity element to them, yeah, it's going to be super.
I'm going to go slightly more dull, actually, and I think the really interesting thing is for me is how it's going to potentially change the nature of collaboration. We've all suffered quite a lot from not being able to get together during the pandemic, but I think what we have done is step forward a little bit in the way that we collaborate remotely. Ben's right. We probably are going to see another pandemic, much as we don't like it. Probably not. Hopefully not for a few years. But also I think the opportunity for people around the world to collaborate together and create new things that come from ubiquitous networking technology like this, again at high speed, high latency, could be really, really interesting. We've talked about the democratization of technology and production, and the ability to get tell really powerful stories with consumer level hardware and consumer level software. It's going to be really interesting to see what people can make of that when they also add that networking capacity into the mix.
Thank you for being part of this podcast. I'm sure I will see you guys at the live event in about a month. But in the meanwhile, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate your time and your thoughts. We'd love to continue the conversation with our listeners on the WIG LinkedIn group. So if you're not a member, go over and sign up. It'd be great to get your feedback, comments, and questions from anything we've discussed today, or any suggestions for future podcast series. So yeah, please do get in touch.
Great. Thanks, Nick. And we'll see you next time.
Hwyl fawr.
Today's WIG Talks Brilliant or Bust podcast was sponsored by Vidispine, cloud-based media workflow solutions to maximize your media potential. Zixi, the global leader in broadcast quality live video over IP. Object Matrix, the cloud storage people who provide platforms that enable creative and production teams with self-serve access to media content on-premise or remotely from anywhere. Today's contributors were Hackthorne Innovation, helping bring the power of modern artificial intelligence and the cloud to bear on story production, content supply chains, and media systems integration. And Christy King, LLC, a media technology consultancy and content creator.